All right, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple items to take care of. We will hopefully have time for questions at the end of the presentation, and you can type those into the question box in the lower portion of your control panel. We'll be posting a recording of the webinar online, but if you would like a copy of the presentation in PDF format, or if your question does not get answered today, please email our support inbox, which will be shown at the end as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Coach Jake to get things started.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Shelby. Hello, everybody. My name is Jake. I'm a health coach here at Health Check 360. I hope you all had a great 4th of July. Just a little introduction here. I am currently in the most northern part of the Lower Peninsula in Michigan, and we could not have had better weather looking over on the very top there of Lake Michigan. So I hope you guys had a safe, wonderful holiday, and we're all happy to be working today. And let's talk a little bit. Let's talk about a hot topic that's been around for quite a while. So today's webinar is titled War on Fat. The goal for today is to talk about the nutrient of fat, the different types of fat, and to talk about the history of fat. As some would say, the war on fat. This is in quotations there. Why were we told to eat less fat, and the effect it has on the society's health? We will review several graphs showing the trends in the American diet and the health trends of U.S. adults. Within the past 60 years, our diet, and more importantly, what foods are available to us, have significantly changed. All right. So let's talk about macronutrients. Let's talk about high level of nutrition. Any foods we eat can be broken down into 3 macronutrients. If you've heard this term before, these are macronutrients: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Most foods, pretty much all foods, contain or include all 3 macronutrients. We're just giving one example here. As an example, 1 cup of kale has 6 grams of carbohydrates, 2.9 grams of protein, and 0.6 grams of fat. The purpose of today's webinar is that last macronutrient, fat, that one that people tend to fear the most. First off, fat is not a bad word, not a bad thing. As I just mentioned, even kale has fat in it. Fat is essential to good health. You must have fat in your diet as it supports growth and repair of cells. Fat is essential for the production of hormones, which control many body processes. So think about it: transports vitamins, it protects our organs, and it provides us energy. In addition, your brain is primarily made up of fat. Fat should not be feared. Again, it is essential to good health. When it comes to fat, there are 4 primary types of fats: polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, saturated, and trans fats. Regardless of the type of fat eaten, each gram of fat equates to 9 calories. And here is really where the debate begins. Which fats are okay? Which fats are okay to eat? And which fats are not? How much fat is okay to eat? Is fat the cause for cardiovascular disease or not? Let's back up several years to the 60s when a low-fat diet started to be recommended. This recommendation was due to the American Heart Association, in cahoots with the USDA, stating that excess fat is associated with increased LDLs, or what you might be familiar with hearing as bad cholesterol. They stated it was an increase of LDL cholesterol that increased risk of cardiovascular disease. This recommendation was a diet that was limited to 30% fat, 50 to 60% carbohydrates, and 20% protein. And this has relatively stuck, and it's been unchanged to current day, so present time. You can see easily by looking at the 3 graphs here. These are all released by the USDA. We'll go through them really quick. But you can all see by looking at the food guide pyramids this suggestion. You see the carbohydrates on the bottom, you see the fats on top. Okay? The top left graph there is the food guide pyramid. This is what most people still recognize. Not many people know that they actually don't use this anymore. It's been removed. Okay? But this is what people still see. This is what people are still stuck at. Okay? This was released to the U.S. by the USDA in 1992. Okay? It was updated in 2005 by My Pyramid, which is the top right. This one kind of confused a lot of people. Personally, it still is not quite sure what they're trying to say here other than just to be active. And they turned it, vertical. But still, you can see what we see here. You see the carbohydrates on the left, meats on the right, or fats on the right. Okay? ChooseMyPlate.gov was introduced in 2011. That's on the bottom. Personally, I do like ChooseMyPlate.gov because it's user-friendly. The first two weren't really user-friendly. What do you do with that? How do you introduce it to your diet? Okay? Because it's user-friendly. It is easier for the population to understand what to do when we have stuff like this. These recommendations were provided with the goal to improve our health. Okay? These were introduced to help us. Okay? But we have a problem. People are getting sicker. There are more cases of metabolic syndrome than ever. And for the most part, again, these guidelines have not changed a whole lot since the 60s. If we are cutting back on fat, why is our nation getting more and more sick? Okay, so again, even though the visual education from the USDA is getting better, what do you still see in these? What is the largest area? Carbohydrates. So we've been told, and it's been engraved in our memory, to consume at least half of our calories from carbohydrates. Now, we tend to be in a polarizing society. If we hear something that's good for us, we tend to overconsume. If we hear something should be limited, we tend to avoid it like the plague. Think this through. What happens when we remove a macronutrient? We have to get our calories from somewhere. So what else happened with this situation or this specific with fat? A lot of good protein sources also have a decent amount of fat in them. Because a lot of proteins, such as animal meat, have fat, people only view them as fat. Red meat is a perfect example of this. It's a great source of protein, but most of the population views it as saturated fat. So we avoid them to make healthy choices. So what's left? Mostly carbohydrates. All right? No, not all carbs are bad. Veggies, fruits, and some grains, they're all carbs, and as long as they're not processed, they are very good for you. But businesses and marketing firms took hold of this and helped shape our society's fear on fat. We've heard remove fat and eat more grains. What happened to food at the supermarket? What do you see walking down the aisle? What is cheap? What has a shelf life of 8 to 12 weeks? What do you see people stocking up on in their carts? Breads, crackers, pastas, frozen meals, frozen foods like pizza, snack foods, and overall a ton of foods that are in bags. I mean, cereal and bread have their own aisle. Let's look at supermarket foods that we see that are thrown in front of us. What advertising sells food? Foods that are labeled or advertised as low-fat or fat-free is still a main marketing strategy for companies to get their product in your cart. You know what fat-free doesn't include? sugar-free. This whole movement that I've been discussing, that I discussed earlier, had their back to sugar, and sugar snuck right in. We are finally starting to get our point across about sugar, but sugar has been hiding in plain sight for decades. Even though we are finally starting to understand the harmful effects of added sugar, it is still added to 80% of the foods available to us. The New York Times released an article stating that out of more than 600,000 foods available at supermarkets, 80% of them have added sugar. 80% of 600,000 have added sugar. Just let that sink in for a moment. We were told what to do to be healthy. So what did we do? We did it. You can see that on this graph. Low-fat foods were sold more because as a population, we asked for it. Those who focused on removing fats ate more carbohydrates. But we were also, in a way, told to eat more carbohydrates. And this actually happened. You can see here what happened to fat and what happened to carbohydrates. Carbohydrates went up, fats went down, and even proteins went down a little bit. This graph shows what happened to animal fat consumption in the U.S. You can see a big decrease here. It is very clear that we, again, listened, and the animal fat rapidly decreased in the 50s and 60s. The first USDA push was in 1961. After years of debate, the USDA went all in 1977. The USDA's biggest push was the low-fat guidelines. This graph shows what also happened in 1977. The line shows a steep increase in obesity after 1977. Like what I discussed earlier, even though this happened and is still happening, the recommendations still really haven't changed a whole lot. This graph tells that other part of the story I keep bringing up. We removed fat and viewed it as this evil thing. Sugar was not. Sugar was introduced to make foods taste better. This graph shows a lot of data over hundreds of years. But you see how much sugar has increased in the past 100 years. What is unique about this graph is it is compared with obesity. You pretty much see an equal rise in obesity as sugar consumption went up. This graph shows just the past 20 years. This graph shows increased weight with the correlation with diabetes. Risk factors associated with metabolic syndrome do increase your chance of type 2 diabetes. This graph shows that correlation. People who are overweight are at higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Okay, so go back a slide. The second graph shows a clear correlation of sugar consumption and obesity. We consumed more sugar, and we also gained a lot of weight, faster than ever before. When we became overweight, we also developed more cases of diabetes. The line is almost identical. This third graph does show that. So let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. There is an increasing amount of discussion and debate between health professionals as to what exactly is the cause for obesity and this metabolic syndrome epidemic. There are a few things that we do agree on. So my point of this webinar today was to kind of take a step back. Look at, in a sense, what's happening or what happened and how we should approach it, and also how we should take in information. Okay? We all agree on this. We need to eat a balance of proteins, carbohydrates, and fat daily. Every single day, we should try to eat a balance of all these foods. Okay? We should reduce the amount of processed foods and eat whole foods as much as possible. If I could get one point across today, it is really this part. I'm going to say it 2 or 3 more times by the end of this webinar. Eat real food as much as you can. This will also help reduce the amount of foods that we eat with added sugar. Non-processed foods don't have added sugar. They might have some natural occurring sugars, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about a lot of the added sugar. Replacing fat with refined grains or high-starch food does increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. Okay, that's that third point. That's a big one. We do know that. So what do we read? What do we see? I mentioned this earlier, and it kind of makes me smile and makes you laugh a little bit, but we live in a polarized society. If someone says reduce or limit, they view it as bad, so they just get rid of it 100%. We're going to focus on fat again here. So some people took this USDA guidelines as we need to get rid of all fat. They never said that. They said limit it. Fine, okay? People and other health professionals don't view fat as that bad, so they ate all the fat. We consumed all of it, and that's all we focused on. It's finding this balance. Try to find this balance and really try to eat real food. Okay, so that's the information I want to give to you guys today. I'm going to let Shelby introduce the next couple webinars, and then I'd love to try to answer some questions if possible.
All right, so next couple webinars, everybody. August is going to be Exercise 101. We're going to do a little bit different of approach. The coaches and other people here at Health Check are going to give their tips, how they fit in exercise, what their favorite exercise is, to hopefully help you guys fit it into your daily lives. And then September, we're going to focus on headaches and your health. So we're going to talk about lifestyle factors that can lead to headaches and migraines and some steps that you can take to hopefully help prevent them. So we'll have that. And then here's our contact information. If you don't get your question answered today, you can email us. That's at the bottom there, healthcoach@healthcheck360.com. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. That's where we share a lot of good information, recipes, tips, that type of thing. The Health Check 360 blog is where you're going to want to go to watch the recording of today's webinar or any past webinars. That's also where you're going to sign up for future webinars as well. And then we are on Instagram, I see there as well. So let's open it up. I don't see any questions right away, but
Shelby,
okay,
one thing I want to one thing I want to discuss is you guys might not know this a whole lot, but definitely within the health and wellness and overall community, the American Heart Association did release another article that I kind of mentioned earlier, again confirming for people to reduce saturated fat. And what happened on there is this was a two-part example here. First of all, they did say continue to reduce saturated fat to 10% of your fat consumption. So again, they did say reduce, but they didn't say remove. Coconut oil is a big debated topic within this. This article was this study, it was a review of studies, and it was about 20 to 24 pages long. It was massive. It took a long time to read and really dissect. But in there was one paragraph, one little section that mentioned coconut oil. And the coconut oil has been viewed as this really healthy food, really good to cook with, and has a lot of health benefits. And for the most part, I will agree with that. But that's not my point of this webinar. Let's discuss what the American Heart Association said. So coconut oil, is it bad for you? Unfortunately, this is not an easy answer. So the American Heart Association released that article titled Dietary Fats and Cardiovascular Disease. In this article, the American Heart Association stood by their recommendation that 30% of calories should come from fat and just 10% should come from saturated fat. Coconut oil is 93% saturated fat. As a result of this, a lot of bloggers came up with a blanket statement saying that coconut oil is bad for you. If you're on social media at all, if you go, if you're on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever, you've seen this shared everywhere. All of a sudden, people are like, oh my gosh, coconut oil is actually bad for us. But if you look at the food label for coconut oil, you will learn that 1 tablespoon of coconut oil is 63% of your daily allowance of saturated fat. So what does that mean in the short answer? You can have it. I will also add that this is a significant debate right now. There are many professionals who will state saturated fat, especially from coconut oil, is not the cause of cardiovascular disease. But with anything, I would recommend is, if you want to, read the American Heart Association article and reading some of the research that they showed and what they were looking at. For those who are pro-saturated fat, form your own educational view. What else is happening? It's not so black and white. Again, look at what else is going on. If you're cooking with coconut oil, we could argue that you're also making healthier choices. What are you cooking it with? What is this? So make your own educated view with this. But be very wary of any blogger. And I'm talking both ends. I'm talking people that say you should brush your teeth with this stuff. Just be wary of the bloggers, especially ones who make a blanket statement for or against anything. I hear this a lot. I did mention it earlier and had a good conversation with one of my supervisors, and it's the idea of avoid it like the plague. Look for keywords like that. Like really, that's a really, really harsh statement to make, and it's very, very powerful. So just to discuss one additional topic with coconut oil and saturated fat is they're not telling us to remove it. They're saying limit it, and we can go with that. We do know there's some healthy things to it, but for the most part, educate yourself on a view. What else is going on? But don't think of it so black and white in a blanketed statement.